So we are happy to welcome Mr. Seth Godin to the podcast. Hello, Seth. How's it going?
Fantastic. Hey, Jack. Hi, Josh. Thanks for having me.
It's really an honor to have you on our show. And we've been reading quite a few of your books and wanted to touch base with you on a couple things. One of the big ones is that you have a new one coming out.
Yeah, it's called This is Marketing, out in the middle of November, and it captures 20 years of my thinking about the end of the marketing industrial complex and the birth of something new that I think is a better way to understand how the world works and to make a difference in the world as well.
Awesome. So Seth, I wanted to ask you, how do you particularly how do you gather all this data and stay ahead of the trends in order to provide this information? Obviously, you have to kind of be thinking way ahead of the curve. How do you particularly stay on top of these trends?
Well, data and trends are two things I try very hard to avoid. Data is one thing. Information is something else. Information is what happens when you apply assertions to data and it seems to line up. So I am working all the time to make assertions, trying to understand, how did that thing become popular? How did that thing fail? Why did that get elected? Why did that get embraced? And if you can make assertions on a regular basis, and I think having a daily blog helps with this, and they start to line up, then you found a key that can open that lock. And in terms of trends tend to be things that are popular because someone profits in the short run from popularizing them. Mm-hmm. And if you want to write about something that's going to last, you can't do that, because I can tell you what the trends were in 1996 when I started the idea of permission marketing. And I can tell you what the trends were when everyone jumped on the Twitter bandwagon, and on and on and on. The trend is fueled by the fact that the media has an easy story to write and that there's some sort of interaction that people will embrace in the short run. But that doesn't necessarily last.
So you really have to step back, and you're looking at the big overarching picture of, the whole wave of the market, just, the monolithic market. And that's really, you have to think past that. I mean, I guess that's where your wisdom and vision comes in.
Yeah. And it's not that hard. It's just a choice, right? Mm-hmm. So I choose, people were totally in my face about the fact that I wasn't on Twitter or using Facebook actively. They were angry that I didn't have comments on my blog. They were, it cost me $1 billion because I didn't understand the World Wide Web in 1994 when it showed up. You're wrong. And every once in a while, that persistence in being wrong pays off because there's a longer, more human element that matters. And I think that, given the field you guys are in, you see that every single day.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you have any advice, because we struggle constantly with not wanting to reinvent the wheel and just emulating what we see other successful real estate investors doing versus how do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah, so in most professions, and I'm not a real estate investor, but in most professions, what we see are two ways to be in that profession. One way is to be a working person who is a cog in the system. So for example, if you need a valve replaced in your heart, there's probably 800 people in the United States who can do that operation for you exactly the same as each other. Mm-hmm. That we need people to do that operation, and they can do one. And then there's this other group of people that are asking the why question, that are looking around the corner, that are trying to create an innovation that shifts gears for people. Mm. And there aren't very many people doing that in any given space, right? So when I went to college in Boston in the late 70s and early 80s, the thing that was a sensation was Faneuil Hall, and this idea that in the downtown area, there could be this unique shopping, dining experience. Mm-hmm. And there was no day-to-day real estate investor who thought that was a good idea. They thought a good idea was to buy a 3-bedroom shared multifamily outside of Cambridge and Lechmere and rent it out for $500 a month, because that's what was always done. And yeah, that works. And you can make it as a real estate investor doing that. And if that's what you're going to do, you probably don't need to listen to a podcast. You probably just need to find a 30-year-old book about how to do it and just be patient and follow the instructions. I don't have the patience for that. And I think that we can create a different way of being in the world by doing something that most people think is crazy. But because we're seeing a different arc to how things are unfolding, you're going to hit triples and home runs that way. And the mistake is when you think you're doing one and you're actually doing the other. That's where the tension kicks in. But whether it's marketing or real estate investing or politics, those are the two paths. And either path is fine, but you got to pick.
How important is the awareness, of which path you're on? Do you think that's crucial, or can you kind of stumble along?
Oh, no, I think it's crucial.
Okay.
I knew a guy who bought self-storage units. And if you reliably and patiently amassed self-storage units with positive cash flow, you'd be fine. You'd be a multimillionaire, not in no time, but in years of time. Because you don't need to be a rocket scientist to correctly execute on the self-storage unit strategy.
Right.
But you do that for a few years and you start to think that not only are you rich, but you're smart. So now you start doing things that are outside that lane and you start trying to invest in web technologies. And all of a sudden it doesn't work. Well, the reason it doesn't work is you switch to the other game, the game of innovation, not the game of execution. And so again, I'm not denigrating either one. It's just when you get confused, that's when you're going to get stressed out and lose some money.
Interesting. So I need to bring up one of your books that it's probably the most recommended book I've ever read, and I've handed it out to people, and I found myself taking pictures of quotes and highlighting and earmarking. Is Purple Cow. And I just love that book. I had a photography studio, and I use that to religiously try to market myself differently. And that was very eye-opening. I was going to ask, what book do people bring up the most when they meet you?
Lately, it's been The Dip.
And
maybe that has to do with the world we live in right now. And The Dip is about quitting and why quitting isn't necessarily a bad thing, and understanding the benefit to allocating your resources to getting through the dip, because on the other side is where the really good stuff is. And so again, if I'll bring it back to what you guys do, it's tempting if you've got a couple properties to quickly try to scale up and go over there and then get a laundromat and do this and to be picking the low hanging fruit. The problem is you're always beginning. And at the beginning is when the amateurs get hammered. That you're going to come out way better off if you own 18 laundromats and just laundromats. Because when you get to the other side of that dip, it's clear sailing, because now you have enough deal flow to hire somebody whose only job is to maintain washing machines and. So The Dip is a very simple book. It's only 90 pages long, but it argues that starting is overrated in some ways, and that quitting is underrated. And that if we just got really clear about what we start and what we finish, we could make a bigger impact.
What sparked writing that book? Was it seeing people just start a ton of ideas and kind of run willy-nilly in all directions and not without clarity and not finishing things? Is that kind of what sparked that?
I grew up in Buffalo, and my dad had a friend, and he probably started 50 projects in my recollection. He had a route delivering seltzer, and he had a cigar store, and he, because that was his thrill. And it was the equivalent of buying lottery tickets. And the thing about lottery tickets is they don't reward persistence. So you shouldn't buy lottery tickets. You should do something where your hard work will get you through the curve to the other side.
Right.
So I hear about that one. And then, in the last 6 months, because I've been teaching the ideas in the new book, This is Marketing, I've been teaching them in this seminar I run called the Marketing Seminar. I've watched 6,000 people use those ideas and interact with each other around those ideas. That's why I needed to make a book, because I could see, like, you're sitting there in this discussion board we run, and I'm spying on people having their interactions around it. And some were in real estate, and some were teachers, and some were freelancers, and some worked for big companies, but they kept bumping into these ideas of status roles and affiliation and the ideas of creating tension to cause forward motion to happen. So we got to get out of this commodity mindset.
Mhm.
And, you know, again, the challenge with people who touch real estate, the easiest thing to do is buy and sell a commodity, because commodities are always for sale at the price, and they can always be sold at the price. But if that's all the value you're adding, then basically you're hoping you're going to get lucky by buying low and selling high. But for every person who buys low and sells high, sooner or later there's someone who buys high and sells low. And you are much better off if you can figure out how to actually add value through the work you do, not simply hope you're in the right place at the right time.
You brought up a couple times here now the concept of tension and whether you're in releasing the tension. Is that one of the main concepts, especially regarding marketing? You have to create that tension in order to make that progress forward?
Okay, so my definition of marketing is making change happen. Voluntarily getting other people to voluntarily change their habits or their beliefs. That's what it is to be a marketer. If you can't make change happen, then you're not a marketer. So if someone was already determined to buy a bag of potato chips and you have a stand at the side of the road that sells potato chips and they buy them from you, you didn't do marketing, you did logistics. But marketing is, oh, I didn't know I wanted potato chips, but now I really want potato chips. That's marketing. Well, every time we are about to change, tension goes with it. The tension of maybe those chips aren't as good as I thought. The tension of, oh, I'm going to have a stomach ache if I eat those chips. The tension of, if I pay $2 for these chips, I won't have $2 to buy the magic beans my mom sent me. There's all this tension about change. So what we can do as marketers is either deny it and pretend there's no tension, or embrace it and say, yeah, that's what I do for a living. What I do for a living is I create tension that is relieved by the forward motion of people taking action. Right? So if I'm going to market this book, well, part of the tension is I'm telling you that inside the book is something you don't know, but once you know it, you'll be glad you knew it. The only way to relieve that tension, if you believe me, if you trust me, is to buy the book. That's what marketers do. We create tension and then we relieve it with forward action.
I was going to ask you too, how much, it's funny because you're teaching exactly what you need in order to sell your products. How much of your own principles do you find yourself consciously applying while you're marketing yourself and your own products?
Yeah, well, so I decided, I mean, we're all hypocrites. I'm definitely a hypocrite, but I decided with permission marketing to always take my own advice. So permission marketing, my first bestseller, you could get a quarter of the book for free if you sent me an email. Well, I got your permission, and then I used that, right? Purple Cow, I don't know if you can see it behind me. Hold on. The first edition of Purple Cow came in a milk carton. Right? And the idea was, I'm taking my own advice, right? And so with each project I do, I say, well, if I was going to give myself advice about how to use this, how would I follow that advice? And so, yeah, that's the idea behind This Is Marketing, is to, the two subtitles that aren't on the book are People Like Us Do Things Like This, and the other one is Work That Matters for People Who Care. So the idea of the book is almost no one cares about what I'm doing, and almost no one is enough people. So instead of trying to make the book for everyone, I'm making the book for a few people, and that's plenty. If I took somebody else's advice to make average stuff for average people, to dumb it down and spread it out, I would have written a totally different book, and I'd be talking about it to different people.
Another theme I hear a lot in your wisdom and teachings is the power of focus. Even just in this short conversation we've had today, you're saying, buy 18 laundromats rather than spread out into different asset classes. And you're saying, I'd rather write to a niche group of people who really, really want it. How important is that power of focus when you're writing or whatever product you're producing?
Let's talk about why people don't want to focus. They don't want to focus because they're hiding. they're hiding. They say it's an asset allocation diversification strategy, but basically we're hiding because we're not all in. We're not responsible. We're here. Whatever happens, you know what? I'm diversified, which is great. You should do that with your personal finances.
Mm-hmm.
But professionals don't diversify. Surgeons don't do plumbing in their spare time. She shows up and she does surgery. And in fact, if you hurt your knee, you don't want to go to a surgeon that does all kinds of surgery. You want to go to a surgeon that just does the left knee. Mm-hmm. Because why wouldn't you, right? Well, the same thing is true. If we believe that expertise, knowledge, and reputation can contribute to your success as a real estate investor, where do you get the most expertise, knowledge, and reputation? By focusing, right? And so, yeah, I'm in favor of diversification, but only as a Black-Scholes option pricing model strategy, not as a marketing strategy.
Awesome. One thing I want to ask you about too, and I don't know how I just stumbled upon this in the last couple of weeks, but it was really an eye-opener too, was your speech on the Icarus Deception. I found a little 5-minute video, and we use that at a real estate meetup as an educational piece. And I wanted to ask you about that too. How did you discover that myth had been changed, and, doing the research on that? And, there's so much content involved in that little 5-minute piece, basically challenging the whole public school system, the whole 9-to-5 work to 65 paradigm, the limiting beliefs, so much wrapped into that. And maybe speak a little bit about how you arrived at that.
When we moved to this tiny little town north of New York City, we had a second generation real estate broker show us around. And as he's driving, he knew the name of every person in all 2,200 houses. He knew who owned the house before them and the house before them. And he knew which houses were going to be priced fairly and when they were coming on the market. And it's like, how did you know? And he said, because that's what I do. There's only 2,200 houses. I notice things. Well, that's what you guys do. That's what I do. If I see a story in the world, I don't know where the Icarus story bumped into me. I'm like, really? And write that down. And 3 years later, that story stuck in my head. In terms of the public school thing, we sent our kids to public school. I was a stay-at-home dad. I saw it all firsthand. And I felt that frustration as a dad. And I said, well, if I'm feeling this frustration, just imagine how much frustration people who aren't as privileged to send their kids to a school this good are feeling. So that went down. And so these things, and you don't hear about 99% of the ones I've written down, but when one's ready, because I'm a noticer, that's what I use. And we all do that, but most people, A, don't focus, and B, when they're ready to share their assertion, they back off. And I think what it means to be a teacher is you don't back off. You say, I noticed this. What do you think? Here, I made this.
Awesome. Yeah, I just love that. I was a jaw drop, eye popping during that. Just there's so much revelations and so many revelations in that one particular 5 minutes. I just love that, and that's why I've been sharing that like crazy as well. Have you found that you've benefited from being remarkable, like you say in Purple Cow, like people just wanting to share your content as a strategy itself? Is that?
Well, I think that's pretty much the only strategy. I mean, when I started Yoyodyne, which was one of the very first internet companies, we were competing against companies that had raised $80 million, and we had raised $4 million. And I just couldn't compete the way they were going to compete. So this, bald-headed guy started giving speeches. We paid for my first 100 speeches. We would go to conferences, be a sponsor of the conference in exchange for me giving a speech. And if I got up to give a speech and I said, this is what everybody knows, and there's no controversy to anything I'm saying, no one would have remembered anything I said. But instead, like in one of the first pages of a book, criticizing the whole Silicon Valley thing, I'm there on page 3 saying something ridiculous, except it wasn't ridiculous. Turned out I was right. But at the time, it seemed ridiculous. And so this idea of, I'm going to put an idea in the world. I'm going to write a column for Fast Company, knowing that the purpose of the column is that people will fax it to their friends. That was the state of the art for technology in those days. Fax this to your friends. And the more I could write things that people would share, the better it worked. And so that's what I do. I'm not here to cure polio. I'm here to say, you knew this already, but I'm going to say it to you in a way that's easy for you to share.
Love that.
Well, I know we're kind of probably at our time here, Seth. I can't thank you enough for the amount of time you've given us already. And we really look forward to seeing what's ahead. And you can count on us to be sharing your content. As Josh mentioned, we've used your material a couple times now in our local real estate investing group. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, maybe give us where can people find your book and what's the release date?
Sure. My blog you can find by typing Seth into Google, and the book comes out November 13th. And there's 7,000 free blog posts there, seths.blog. I hope people check it out. And I just want to say to both of you, I know how hard it is to show up on a regular basis with a podcast, with material, and you're doing it day after day. So on behalf of the people who listen to you, thank you for that. It's very generous.
I appreciate it, Seth. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Seth.
All right. We'll see you. Take care.